All right, so in order to change the in order to change the Delrin output gear on the DM5, you'll need at least 2 screwdrivers with flathead, and at least a tweezer and a wooden stick, or a Q-tip will work better, but any wooden stick will work. So the first step you want to do is to find the opening on the retainer ring that holds the output gear. So in this case, I have an opening right here. So if you see the retainer ring, there's an opening here. Yeah, so this is the opening. Now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna use the 2 flathead screwdrivers. And again, the size doesn't really matter as long as they're flathead. So we're gonna push the retainer ring out. Let's do that. So one screwdriver is holding one end of the retainer ring, and the other one holds the other end. And we're gonna push this out slowly, not to be careful not to damage the bearing. So yeah, so you see how the retainer ring kind of opens up a little bit. So if we keep pushing, it's gonna go out like that. Sometimes it may be a little harder, but you just have to push it slowly until the retainer ring comes off. So you're gonna take this the old gear out. Sometimes the bearing stays in there, and just pull it out, and it's normal. And if you see there are 2 shims that used to be under the bearing, take this out and then see if you need to adjust the thickness of the shims. You may use different shim combinations to achieve a thickness that you want. And normally a good start is to use whatever shim thickness that you already have, and sort of install the new gear and then see if that works or not. If that doesn't work, we may need to readjust the shim thickness. But yeah, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reinstall the shims. What the shims do, they basically sort of adjust the height of the output gear so that the retainer ring can get inside the groove, or can engage with the groove. If the shims are too shallow, if the thickness is too shallow, then the output gear will be able to wobble. But if it's too thick, you will not be able to install the retainer ring. So you just have to find the right one, the right thickness, and that may involve trial and errors. So now that we have this off, the old gear off, we're gonna put the thicker gear. So make sure the bearings are in. If they're not in yet, install the bearings completely flush with the surface of the gear. And yeah, so just install it. Try to find the engagement that will allow you to put this all the way down. So just kind of slowly pushing it in. And it's very normal for this bearing to come off because it's a little loose sometimes, and that's completely normal. So if this bearing comes off from the output gear, you're gonna use the Q-tip to sort of like push it down carefully, and you wanna use the back. You only want, when you have to use the wooden end of the Q-tip, you want to make sure you push it down on the outer race of the bearing, not the inner race, because you may damage the bearing easily. So one way to do that is to just push it all the way outside and then push it down. So you notice how I am pushing down on the outer race, not the inner race of the bearing. Now I'm exposing the top groove here just enough so that I can put the retainer ring. So if you don't see a groove in here, that means the thickness of the shim is too thick, and you may have to add more mils to add more shim to the current stack. So so the retainer ring has 2 sides. One side right here, if you use a microscope or if you use an eye loupe, you will see that it has a bulging surface, And then on the other side, it's very flat. So one side bulging, one side flat. So the side that's flat has to be at the bottom, and the side that's bulging has to be at the top. So this side is the bulging side. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna place this on the bearing like that. And this may be a little tricky, and you may not get it right at the first time, but it's okay, we'll just try. It's best to use a non-magnetic tool to do this, because this is very thin and very light, so if you have a magnetic tool, it'll just keep pulling it out, so this is non-magnetic, so that's great. So I'm gonna try to use the tweezer to give me a push, on the retainer ring, just enough so that it sticks in there. So let's do that. So I'll use my my index finger to push it down. To push it in a little bit. So let's do that. Use my index finger, push it in a little bit. You see that? So it's halfway in. Now we can use the flathead screwdriver. Be careful not to damage the bearing. You don't want to push the screwdriver down like that. You just want to keep it at the surface and sort of push it this way. So instead of pushing it down like that, you want to just push it this way. Make sure not to apply pressure downward, because otherwise you may damage the bearing. But yeah, let's get back to this. So I'll put my screwdriver. I'll place my screwdriver on the outer race of the bearing like that. Again, don't push the screwdriver down. Just give enough pressure with your index finger to push it this way. So let's do that. So push it in. Now it sticks in position. So one way to see, if you remember, we put shims of different thicknesses, and try to wobble or try to apply pressure on this output gear, sort of like try to wobble it. So if I try to wobble this and this doesn't move, that means you have a good shim thickness. But if you try to wobble this and this thing wobbles with your hand and it's not staying put in position, that means your shim thickness is too shallow, and you may need to remove this retainer ring and add more shims to the bottom of the bearing, and then redo the whole process again. But as you can see, this is very fixed, and it stays in position, so I have a good shim thickness. And lastly, if the shim thickness is too thick, you will not be able to see the groove on top completely exposed. And in that case, you will not be able to install the external retainer ring. So this may have to involve a few trial and errors for you to get to the right shim thickness. But it's very important to get the right shim thickness.